But the Cub organization is a great group, and it's here to challenge unfair rate increases. And I'm sure Eric, who is our speaker, and I'm going to tell you just a few things about him. But over the years, utilities like Nicor and Peoples Gas and ComEd and others have constantly tried to impose a new higher rate increase, even when they were making record profits. But the Cub is here to fight back for us consumers. And it's very interesting that just on January 9th of this year, in the editorial portion of the Chicago Tribune, there's a headline, you may have seen it, Nicor gas delivery rates have doubled in 6 years, and now it wants another $309 million. And then it says enough. So that's what we're up against. Cub does a lot of great things. Just the other day I got my Cub voice. I don't know how many of you get this, but it's very good. And if you don't get it, I'm sure you could sign up, and tells you all kinds of interesting new things. Tells us about the people at Cub. Okay, about today's speaker. Our speaker today is Eric DeBellis, D-E, capital B-E-L-L-I-S, Eric DeBellis. He's General Counsel for Cub. He is stepping in for Sarah Moskowitz, who is the new executive director. She replaced David Colott, I believe, when he retired. But she had to be out of town for an important meeting, and we're fortunate to have Eric step in for Sarah, and I'm anxious to hear what the activities are that currently is in taking up their time and helping us as consumers. Very briefly, Eric is a University of Illinois graduate, received his law degree from California, Berkeley. He joined Cub in the year 2020 as regulatory counsel before rising to the position of general counsel. He represents utility ratepayers in lawsuits primarily before the Illinois Commerce Commission. Let's give a big welcome to Eric DeBellis.
Not used to everybody being quite so happy to see me, so thanks everyone. Yeah, it's like people make a lot of lawyer jokes and we hear them. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's wonderful to see everyone's faces, and to the people on the internet, hello, let me know how the future is. I'm gonna talk about what is on your utilities bills, how those charges got to be what they are, and what I do to fight rate hikes that are unfair, and what you all can do in your various options on how to try to manage your own bills. Right? I promise there will only be one reference to Jimmy Carter's sweater. All right. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to start with an overview of Cub. Yes, that is Ric Flair yelling. I thought, wake people up a little bit. How the charges on my bills work, how can I save money, and some recent developments and cases that we've been doing. So first off, what is Cub? As was mentioned before, we are not the illustrious National League Baseball franchise. We are the Citizens Utility Board. So we were created by statute, so state law in Illinois in 1984. Don't ask when I was born in reference to that. However, in those 40 years, we've been hard at work advocating for everyone in the state, all the utilities ratepayers, for water, gas, electric, and in some instances, telecoms. A lot of y'all probably remember when that was more heavily regulated. Today, less so, because there's more options, even though it doesn't always feel like it. So we have, there's a common misconception that a lot of people think that we're part of the government. We're not. We were created by the government, but we're a nonprofit, we're independent, we get by on donations. And So we're kind of an unfunded mandate in a way. We have to exist, and we were given a bunch of work to do by the state, but no money. So thank you to everyone who's helped us with that. And you can see there we have our consumer hotline, where if you have something you're unsure about on your bill, like, oh, why was this $800? That doesn't seem right. You can call us, and our staff will talk you through any concerns that you may have. If you have a dispute with your utility, not sure what to do, we have a staff who are familiar. They've probably been there before, unless it's really wacky, in which case it's going to be fun and we'll talk about it in a meeting. But really experienced, great team. Love working with all of them. And yeah, we do about 500 of these outreach events a year, even though there are only 20 people in our organization and less than half of us are outreach. I'm technically not outreach staff. I'm the head of our legal department, but we wear many hats because when I heard that Sarah couldn't come out and do this, I thought, well, it'll be fun. I'll do it. So yeah, the results that we've gotten. So this is just speaking for my department, legal. The Illinois Commerce Commission has estimated that just our issues in our cases over these 40 years have saved consumers $20 billion, which that's a conservative estimate. It doesn't include individual cases and some of the subtler things, but 20 billion is pretty good for an organization that our total expenditures are less than 1/300th of that. So I think a 30,000% return on investment is pretty good. I think we're doing all right. We like to run a tight ship, you know. Yeah, and sometimes we have individual customer complaints that we deal with that. In some instances, we had someone, remember a few months ago, who my coworker Ani Warnock was able to help, who this person had been overcharged by an alternative retail electric supplier over the course of several years by over $10,000. We got that person, and the company said, oh, well, you know, we're willing to settle this if you're willing to sign away your right to sue us for, it was like a tiny fraction of that. Like, you know, we'll give you like $50 and a sandwich. And then they got a call from Cub and they're like, oh no, this is serious. And the person was paid back in full. And we're like, yeah, you're going to pay them back with interest or we're suing you. So that is the power of having a team of nerds at your disposal, free of charge. And I promise I'm a better lawyer than the guy from The Simpsons. So the charges, yeah, I know, Austin, I'm a dork. All right. So the charges on the bill. So this is the front. Am I blocking this for people? Someone's nodding, so doing my best Vanna White over here. All right. So on the front of your electric bill, first couple of things are pretty self-explanatory. Your name, your address. If that doesn't look right, that's your first problem, because you're getting someone else's bill. The total amount, always a sad subject. Your usage tracked by month. That's a typical pattern, right? You've probably noticed this about your electric bills. In the summer, we are what's called a summer peaking system out here in the upper Midwest, because the biggest use of electricity for most people is your air conditioning. And so you can see those spikes, that high one in July, right? And then in the winter, it's a little lower. But unfortunately, then you have your gas bill going up. So they're hitting you from one side or the other in any given month. But I want to go to box 5 there. I don't know how many people are familiar with the distinction between supply charges and delivery charges. Like, how many people ever think about that, right? I got a hand. Thank you, sir. I see you. Yeah, all right. Yeah, we got a couple fellow nerds. All right. I appreciate you all. I see. Yeah, I see the audience came here knowing what the presentation was going to be about, and you still showed up. Hats off to y'all. So the supply charge total, that's what you pay for, and this is an electric bill. We're going to use this as an example. So that's what you pay for the electricity itself. So this is effectively the money that's going to the power plants, in a sense. And so if ComEd is your supplier, which you'll see here, it says ComEd provides your energy. If there's a different name, then you're on an alternative supplier. We call them ARIES, alternative retail electric suppliers. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But for most people, it's going to say there, ComEd provides your energy. And so you pay the market rate with no markup. ComEd or any other electric utility, if you live downstate, it'd be Ameren, Quad Cities, Mid-American, they don't make a profit on the supply part. That's what we call a pass-through. So the Illinois Power Agency, the state agency, buys on consumers' behalf from these regional auctions and signing long-term contracts with power plants and solar arrays and all these things. And then they just tell your utility, this is how much it costs, and that's passed through. Okay, so then if you're on an alternative supplier in Aries, your rate's determined by your contract. And I'm going to get in a second on how you can figure out whether, if you're on one of those deals, whether you're being overcharged, and if you're offered a deal, whether it's one that makes sense for you. So then the delivery charges total is what you pay for ComEd to deliver the electricity to you. So all the physical infrastructure that delivers it. So supply, the juice itself, delivery, the doohickeys and gadgets that make it get to your house. So you get more detail on the back of the bill. And they always put the fine print on the back, right? And so supply, box 5 there, you see you have a couple different charges. The electric, so first thing, the name that's listed here. If it says the name of your local utility, you're getting the standard supply charge that everybody does. If there's a different name, that's the company you would call if you want to go back to that, or it's the company you already talked to sign up. That would be an alternative supplier. I mention this so much because it is the #1 thing when I look at friends and relatives' bills, where they're like, I don't know why I'm paying so much. I live in a townhouse. Why is my bill higher than my parents who live in a big house and keep the thing hotter than Africa all day? And the reason often has been that they are on an alternative supplier and they did not remember signing up. Right? I've talked to some people like, oh, right, that was the guy who went door to door. I can't say no to people when they're right there. They're just, my wife's friend, she's so sweet, she's so nice. She should not make financial decisions alone. Right? I felt so bad for her, but she was being overcharged. So then the electric supply charge you'll see listed, the number of kilowatt hours of energy that you used. So it's a unit of how much electricity you use. For gas, it'll say therms. For water, gallons. That's the only one that feels normal to normal people is gallons. And that's multiplied by the volumetric, so like per kilowatt hour charge per unit. And so the electric supply charge is for basically paying the power plants. Transmission services charge is for those overhead, big, high tower lines that you see over nice bike paths and all that, right? Those transmission lines are owned by a separate company. The power plants are owned by a separate company. Your utility is a distribution local utility. They don't own the power plants. They do business with them. They don't own them. They don't own the huge overhead lines. They own the rest. And so those charges are for supply, and they're totally volumetric. None of it is fixed. How much you use determines how much those charges are. If you used nothing, your supply charge would be nothing. Except that the purchased energy adjustment there, that third one, that's just if there was some kind of estimation error where they thought their whole system, people were going to use this much, so they set rates at this level to recover their costs, and they misguessed on the weather. And so there will be a little adjustment to make up that estimation sort of rounding error from previous months. So delivery, that is where your utility makes its money. That's where it gets paid for what it does. So first off, you have a customer charge. That's just a fixed monthly amount. That is just the cost of being their customer. It's to cover the things that they need to maintain whether you're using anything or not. It's basically the cost to be connected, right? So some people have found, for example, if they move to an all-electric home they previously had a gas boiler and gas stove and all that, and they went to electric, one of the benefits that they found is they no longer have to pay the fixed customer charge to their gas utility, right? Which in Chicago, if you're people's gas customer, before you use 1 therm of gas, you're paying $50 a month. That's effectively your minimum bill. All the time we get calls from people who are like, this can't be right. I was out on vacation. I wasn't even home. I'm sure I used a little bit to keep the house from freezing, but how is my bill $55? Do you live in Chicago? Yeah. I have news for you. And so then the standard metering charge, it's the same idea. It's still a fixed charge. That is to maintain the meter that reads your usage, right? Everybody has one, whether you're using a lot of power or a little power, it's still doing about the same amount of work. So they charge everybody the same for metering. The other charges are volumetric. You pay more if you use more. So the distribution facility charge, that is the volumetric part of what the electric utility charges you to maintain its infrastructure. That's effectively based on however much you're using the system is determining how big the system needs to be, right? You have higher peaks, more wear and tear on the system. It's like the Walmart parking lot is built to fit all the cars it gets on Black Friday, its busiest day. Most days, it's half empty, right? It's a huge lot. But they still need to maintain that big old parking lot because there is a day every year when they need all of those spaces. It's similar with the electric grid. They can't downsize and upsize it every day. It needs to be right-sized for those peaks. And so your contribution to those peaks, in addition to your day-to-day usage, are both very relevant to how much it costs to serve you, right? And so that distribution facility charge speaks to that. And the Illinois electricity distribution charge, which is fairly similarly named, that's actually a tax that the utility pays, but we have to reimburse them for their taxes because they only had to pay that tax because they were serving us, so that's kind of our fault. And so then, so we know those supply rates, right? You're paying that supply rate because that was the market price of the commodity itself, right? They ran a big auction, a state agency that has absolutely no interest in making you pay any more than you have to. I know the people at the IPA, they're trying hard, they're good at their jobs, right? They have your best interests in mind, they really do. They're dorks like us, but they just happen to be government dorks, and I'm a nonprofit dork. It's strawberry or vanilla, you know. They may or may not get paid better. I may or may not be bitter, but but for delivery, now how do we decide how much we have to pay our utility? Because they don't have any competitors, right? There's just one per region. If you're in the ComEd service territory, even if you have a different supplier, at least for delivery, you're working with ComEd, unless you want to go off the grid and have your own generator and, you know, be on a stationary bike to power the fridge, which would be impressive. But your neighbors might think you're a little weird. So they have what's called a natural monopoly, right? By law, they are the only utility serving the area. And that's because we don't want these redundant investments. And imagine having all those power lines next to each other and having to rip out the system and put it back in every time you switched. It's just not practical. It's not the same as having different cell or internet providers where they're just connecting you to basically a different tower or satellite and it's all seamless. The cost to switch distribution utilities would be absurd. It just can't work that way. But they have no competitors. Can't they just charge you whatever they want? Well, no. They're regulated. And that is where I come in. So the Illinois Commerce Commission, which Don mentioned in the introduction, is a 5-member state agency where they're kind of like judges, except you haven't heard of them, probably. And they're appointed by the governor. Only 3 of them can be of the governor's party. The other 2 need to be the other party or independents, right? And they're confirmed by the state Senate, not the federal Senate. That would be crazy. It would also take like 10 years, let's be honest. It'd be like, well, Illinois wants this next. And so every one of these private investor-owned utilities, so electric utility here, you're talking about ComEd. For gas, depending on where you live in this immediate area, you're looking at Nicor or North Shore. If you came in from the city, People's Gas. Downstate, they're both handled by Ameren, which is a combined gas and electric utility. Those private investor-owned utilities are regulated because they have an incentive to price gouge you because they have no competition. If you live in Naperville or a bunch of rural co-ops or places that have, or Springfield too, they have municipal, like government-owned utilities. They're not regulated this way because the theory there is they're accountable to the public, right? If the city government isn't happy with the utility, they can change things. If you're not happy with how the city's managing it, you can fire your mayor and city council in elections, is the theory. Here, it's a private company. They're only accountable through ICC regulation. So their rates are cost-based. They have, under the Constitution, basically, a right as a regulated party to be able to cover their costs and make a reasonable profit. So what are reasonable costs and a reasonable profit margin? Well, that's vague language, which means lawyers get involved and everything gets crazy. But there is a method to all the madness. Now, the first step that ends up in what your actual rates that you pay are is determining the revenue requirement, how much money it takes for them to serve you as customers, all of us, in a year, plus a little extra for the shareholders. So that's their operations and maintenance, so O&M costs, plus depreciation, plus the return on rate base. That's super simple, right? Everyone's a professional CPA here, I assume, right? Now, if a CPA, most CPAs looked at this stuff, they would say you're not following any of the rules. And the reason is the federal government has a separate tax code for just utilities. So their accounting rules are even different. It's real fun to litigate. So O&M, operations and maintenance, that's your payrolls, your routine daily expenses, the gas in the truck to go out and check the meter, day-to-day operations, not the kinds of things that the company is taking out big loans to finance, right? And then your rate base, that's the other category, is large infrastructure investments that they finance upfront and pay down over a long time because you're benefiting from them for a long time. So say ComEd needs to replace a bunch of wooden poles to hold up power lines. Those poles, hopefully, are going to be up for decades. And so they finance them over decades, right? And so through a combination of loans and issuing stock to their shareholders, they raise the necessary capital and they amortize, like a mortgage, like a loan, the cost of that over many, many years. So depreciation is like paying down the principal on a loan. So like the progress that you make toward paying off your mortgage every year, the part that's not interest, that's what we're talking about with depreciation. So if an asset depreciates over 50 years, you're paying down 2% of it in your rates every year. Then there's the return on rate base, and that is the cost to finance it. So the interest payment on a loan is the same idea, right? So that's where banks and shareholders are getting theirs. And the percentage return that they get on rate base is the main subject of a lot of rate case litigation, because utilities will come in and say, we need a 10.5% return on equity for our shareholders. Any less would be robbery. And we come in and say, are you drunk? And we get into an incredible amount of finance speak and accounting and talking about the Federal Reserve unironically. And it gets really into the weeds, but that is where That's where the money is, because they have an incentive. The way this works is, so O&M, it's a pass-through. They don't make a profit on people's salaries, putting gas in the truck, the day-to-day stuff. Where the utility makes profit is on how big rate base is, so how much infrastructure investment they're making, the big gadgets, the big buildings, all of the huge infrastructure that you see around you, and all the fancy software to make it extra spiffy and capable of doing all these things that none of the customers know are even an option. So why are you spending money on that? And the percentage margin that they get on it, that's where they make profit. So when we start asking about that in cases, that's when they start getting upset. And that is where it becomes a contact sport. We have a good, respectful relationship with Counsel for the utilities. We deal with each other all the time. It's fighting constantly over petty things is no way to live, but we fight all the time over not petty things. I'll tell you that. So step 2, once you determine that total amount of money, that total annual revenue requirement, you allocate those costs to different classes. So rate classes are residential, commercial, and large commercial, which we call industrial, is sort of shorthand. Because if you're using that much power in your business, you're probably some kind of factory or a data center or something. And within those classes, after they allocate, all right, so our costs are being driven this much by this class, right? Like these factories use so much power, or they tend to be remote. We have to build so much infrastructure to reach them. The pipes we build to pipe gas into there are just bigger, right? It costs more to serve them. They get a bigger share. And then the residentials get their allocation and whatnot. And then from there, they divide that class's share by how much power do we think they're going to use as a group this year. And after you divide that down, you get the per kilowatt hour rate. So it's all backed out from their costs. Taxes, pretty straightforward. The fees, you can see the list on the back of your bill. It's generally pollution reduction, various environmental related programs, environmental cost recovery, renewable portfolio standard. The zero emission standard, or the ZEC, that's the subsidies to keep nuclear plants online. They're about half of power generation in the state. I know that's a very vague name, so I tried to piece together and translate some of those things. And then taxes, it's paying the government. We all know that. But this last thing, the very last thing on your bill, is important if you are on or considering taking service from an Aries. The price to compare. In this month, it was 6.809 cents per kilowatt hour. That is supply. Aries salespeople will go door to door saying, well, you're paying, say, 16 cents per kilowatt hour. We're offering you 10. They're talking about supply and delivery. They're only offering you supply. This happens all the time. And someone says, oh, well, that's less. Sign me up. So now you're paying 10 for supply when you could have been paying 6.8. Because you're not thinking about supply versus delivery, and you still have to pay ComEd their share, and now you're just paying extra for the other part. They'll also sell people on paying a little extra for green plans that end up not actually being green. They'll also sell people on introductory rates that then spike up later, and they just assume you're never going to read your bill again. Under Illinois law, you are allowed to terminate the contract without a fee. All right, so if you're in a situation where somebody wants to get out of that kind of deal, you can call CUB and we can walk you through that. It's not a terrible process anymore. We had to fight like heck to make it not a terrible process, but we're there now. So I just always want to point that out. Gas bills are really similar. Don Cheadle is right. We should keep going. It's the same idea. Replace kilowatt hours with therms. You get it. Okay. Water bill. Yeah, gallons. Just change it to gallons. Same idea. But you're probably on municipal water unless you get a bill from Aqua or Illinois American. Those are private water utilities. Did you have a question? Yeah. So then, how you save money? I promised Jimmy Carter's sweater. First off, there is, as back in the 70s during the energy crisis, President Carter, who I'm told it didn't go over well. This was before my time. Told people, well, you can set your thermostat a little higher in the winter. You can wear a sweater. There are things that you can do sort of to save money. And a lot of people went, no, I just want my prices to be lower. Come on, man. Now, you guys already know probably most of these strategies. Don't leave things on if you're not using them. Go easy on the thermostat if you can. I don't have to lecture you on the things that your mother probably yelled at you. You know, we're not paying to heat the outside, right? That you always grew up with. There are some nerdier things that aren't as obvious. So you have things like peak time savings, where you get a email or text message or call from the utility to tell you power is going to be really expensive for us in a couple hours. If you could turn down your thermostat a bit, we'll pay you. It's not a lot of money, but it's something, right? There's no downside to participating in that program. It's just a nice way to make a couple bucks here and there. Community solar is, maybe you don't have solar, but you pay a subscription to help fund a solar plant out in usually a rural area. You get a bill credit for the generation that your share of that plant put out there, and that's cut off your bill. And then you pay that company that built the solar a percentage of that bill credit. So in my case, I'm a subscriber. I have a 20% discount effectively. So say I get $10 off my ComEd bill, and then I pay Nexamp $8. I saved $2. That, again, there's really no downside. It's community solar. A lot of people get suspicious because scam artists try to sell solar deals all the time that aren't good. And so they just hear, oh, community, what is this? If you hear an offer, you see an offer, and you're not sure what to make of it, you can call us and we can walk you through whether it's legit. Hourly pricing is a system ComEd has where you pay the wholesale real-time price of electricity. So when it's hot and everybody's using a ton of power, it's more expensive. And so if you can decrease your usage during those times and avoid those really high charges and move your usage to more overnight, you can save money. I'm on this program too. I have an electric car. We plug it in overnight. I turn a dishwasher on at night. I pre-cool the house in the summer in the morning, let it drift up a little in the afternoon, and I end up saving money. Not everyone's in a position to be able to do that, though. I understand. It depends on your lifestyle. You might have the grandkids running around and turning on lights everywhere in the middle of the day. My niece is like that, so different strokes for different folks, but you can go to the company's website and see what you would have paid last year if you were on that rate. Energy efficiency rebates, so you can go to ComEd's marketplace website for information on rebates you can get on various energy efficient products if you need to replace things, like those fancy light bulbs that Don mentioned. And so if you have rooftop solar or an energy storage, net metering is basically your generation from your system counts against your bill and you get credit for that. There's various federal tax incentives. I know that the current administration has talked about changing a lot of that, but for what it's worth, generally a change in the tax code would be effective the next year. So if there are legislative changes, anything you're doing now would still be subject to this year's rules that are currently in effect for what it's worth. You can find a lot of information on that online. I think a lot of the federal websites were scrubbed, but there's a lot of third-party information about that that's reliable. And then for income qualified folks, and this is by income, not by life savings, so this is relevant to a lot of seniors, a lot of retirees. You have LIHEAP, if people are familiar, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, WEC, Illinois Solar for All. Low income discount rates are new from utilities, like NICOR and North Shore. Depending on if you are at if you're at less than triple the federal poverty line, you get a 5% discount. If you're less than double, I'm forgetting the exact percentage, but it keeps going all the way down to if you are at half of the federal poverty line or lower, it's a 75% discount on your total bill. So that's relevant, I think. And for the rest, and for all of us, if you see the line item on your bill about low income discount, right, that is what it's about. ComEd's going to be rolling theirs out soon, but the gas utilities already have them. There was a court decision downstate involving Ameren's similar low income discount rate that might throw things into a bit of chaos. We'll let you know what happens. And if you're interested in all of the hippy-dippy granola, environmentally friendly stuff, my coworker Marina Minnick knows way more than I do about those programs. So she's an awesome person to reach out to. Like if you think, should I get rooftop solar? I see a lot of sun on my roof. You know, she's good to talk to. And finally, recent stuff that's happened. So ComEd just wrapped up a rate case after 2 years. They're usually 1 year, but the Commerce Commission made them redo their entire grid plan for these 4 years, 2024 through 2027. Under the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, I didn't name it, they have to do, or they chose to do actually, 4-year plans. So through 2027, we know what our rates are going to be, right? And they have to plan out their grid investments steadily over time instead of just coming in every year and being like, yeah, more stuff broke and we're just like kind of meandering and could we get more money? Now it's like, okay, this is where we're going with this. So it's a little more organized, but the Commerce Commission, which Governor Pritzker appointed commissioners who I would describe as fair and taking the job seriously, and the utilities would probably describe as super duper mean to us. Your mileage may vary depending on whether you get an executive bonus if the profits of utilities go up or not. So after 2 years of litigation, the ICC ruled in our favor on a lot of issues. And yeah, we saved y'all $1.4 billion over 4 years. So pretty happy about that. Unfortunately, rates are still going up. It can be a bit like Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill and it goes down the other side for us. But we also do have to appreciate, of course, over time, the cost of things do go up, right? And so for us, we are always fighting to make incremental progress in cutting rate hikes. And something that I think is always important for us to keep in mind, and that I tell coworkers when we feel like, yeah, we took a big bite out of it, but people's rates are still going up, is, do you imagine what they would charge if we didn't exist? Right? And then we all feel a little better, like, oh man, that would be nuts, right? So ComEd also had a rate design case. So that's the allocation of costs between different types of customers, the sort of formula for how your specific charges are calculated. And an interesting thing that came out of that is starting January of next year, they're going to have to offer time of use rates. So I mentioned before real-time pricing, where it's like you're frantically checking this app on your phone to be like, where's the market going now, right? The way time of use rates work is you still have variable charges where the mid-afternoon is more expensive, overnight is the cheapest, and the rest is in the middle, but it's on a predictable daily schedule, so you can just set it and forget it, right? I can explain to my wife, who's like, oh God, what nerdy thing did you sign us up for, babe? I have a life. I can't just stare at a phone app, right? And just say, don't use things between 3 and 7, and when possible, try to use them between 9 and 6, like 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. She's like, oh, well, that's simple. Geez, I could do that, right? And so a more predictable system for people who opt into it will be available. And electric vehicle owners will get a $2 a month bill credit, which, sure. We argued if you're going to do that, it should probably be more than $2. people could disagree over whether they should do it, but if they are going to do it, it should probably been more than $2 because that might be less than it costs to administer the program. But that's what ended up being approved. But for anyone who has an electric vehicle and charges at home, FYI, if you sign up for a time variant rate, so real-time pricing or the time of use rate, they'll give you $2 a month. And NICOR just filed their rate case. So Don, it was accurate but open to interpretation, the $308, $309 million number that you gave. With taxes, it's over $325 million. NICOR likes to not mention that because like, oh, well, that money's not going to us. That money's going to the government. Yeah, well, we're still paying it. So as far as we're concerned, it's $325. And yeah, when I said earlier that they want an ROE over 10%, you guys might have thought I was joking. No, that's a real number. That's a real thing they said out loud. And signed their names on it. So we've intervened. They'll be hearing from your lawyers, which is us, Laura and me. Don't worry, you don't have to pay us. And People's Gas in North Shore, they filed the preliminary paperwork to set up filing a rate case, but they haven't filed it yet. They're in front of the Commerce Commission over, you may have heard in the news that they have this pipeline replacement program in Chicago that they've, just grossly mismanaged and spent like 6 times as much as they initially said. And so there's a little heat on them right now, so they may or may not file, we're not sure. And if you have solar or storage, this year now, net metering is a little less generous. It just applies to supply, not the supply and delivery, but you get an upfront payment, $300 per kilowatt size of the system to offset the cost to install it. There's been some proposed legislation, so if anybody here is on a private water utility or is afraid that one might buy their municipal system and make it more expensive, CUB wants for Missouri's rule to apply where if you're going to buy a municipal system for water or sewers, the local voters who would be affected have to pass a referendum approving it. Currently, you don't have to do that. The other thing that we want is for shareholders of the companies that are buying the system to cover 20% of the acquisition cost. Right now, they pass 100% to their existing customers. So they have a huge incentive to just keep buying more and more systems and shoving those costs on their ratepayers. And then we also, I'm going to skip the last couple, but this one's big too. On your utilities bills, included in those charges are trade association dues, which is basically like lobbying, which they're not allowed to charge you for, but they outsourced it to like the American Gas Association or someone. Political advocacy, brand promotion, executive misconduct insurance. Executive misconduct insurance we are paying for. You can guess what it's like, what the premiums are like for ComEd. Some people read the paper. Yeah. So the insurance policy for in case, they get caught trying to bribe the Speaker of the House, you paid for that insurance policy and when the rates went up. And also the fees to pay the outside law firms and consultants that fight me in court. So you guys aren't paying me, but you are paying my opponents. Doesn't seem right, does it? Considering I'm advocating for y'all and they are not. So we've been trying to push for legislation to push those costs onto the shareholders, who are the people who benefit from all of those things, instead of us having to pay for things that go directly against our own interest. Thanks. Yeah.
Wonderful, Eric. Arnie's going to look for questions from the auditorium. Then we'll have any questions from Zoom.
We got one right there. Her hand shot right up. Yeah. She was ready to go. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
Oh God, favorite.
I receive 2 mailings from ComEd every month.
Yeah.
And I really don't care what my neighbors are using, but I get a mailing that tells me that, my neighbors are using more or less than I am. That's my comment. My question is, how do we get into that pay for usage next year?
So sorry, when you say pay for usage next year, what do you mean? Oh, the time of use rate. Yeah. So that, like on the regular schedule, so you'll be able to sign up on the company's website or you can call them in January of 26. Yeah.
Do the,
Well, I mean, you can do it later too. It's just January is the earliest you can.
does the utility ask for 10% because they figure they're going to have to fight you and then get 5% anyways?
I think a little part of them hopes I forget to file. But they did, Ameren filed the rate case while my wife was in labor. I remember that. But in their defense, they didn't know. Their lawyer was like, she came early. Why? Yeah, that's part of it, is sort of an anchoring effect, right? In the past commissions, not the current commission, would do some kind of averaging. And then it would be like, we would make a sincere, real, this is what we actually think their cost of capital is. We're not trying to play around and make the number artificially low. We're not BSing you. This is realistic recommendation. Staff for the Illinois Commerce Commission would do something similar, usually a little higher. And the company would make up some stupid number. And then they get averaged. And so what you get is inflated, right? It's the anchoring effect that you're talking about, right? And now, this commission, when the utilities say something that they know is unfounded or gibberish, they just ignore that part, which is good. And so, actually, there was recent, in a case, a witness from staff for the commission actually asked NICOR, you've been rejected asking these kinds of numbers for several years now and cited a bunch of cases. Like, why are you doing this again? They haven't responded yet. They have 28 days. But yeah, it's part of it is an anchoring effect and sort of thinking like, let's guide everyone's expectations, or if there's settlement, we want to start from this high point. But thankfully, the way our commission operates right now, that chicanery isn't actually affecting the outcome.
Eric, I think, I can't remember the year, but I think somebody from Cub came out here for a day, brought one of their utility bills, and you had somebody on site go over it with them.
Yeah.
Was that something that might be in the works again sometime?
Oh, yeah, that's a utilities bill clinic. We do UBCs all the time. We'd be happy to work with the staff here to set another one up.
We could do that, okay.
Yeah.
And did you give the phone number to call if anybody has a question?
Yeah, so there's you can look up so there's the consumer advocacy hotline is this 800 number. There's also, you can look up our main office number, and Jante would be happy to transfer you to whoever is appropriate as well.
What the lady talked about, you get that little notice with your bill that says, oh, everybody around you is using much less electricity than you're using. And you know perfectly well your neighbors, they have lights on 24 hours a day, it seems, and I'm one person.
Yeah.
And I don't. And why do they do that? It's really annoying.
Right. So that's valuable feedback for them too. I'll have to mention that, I got multiple complaints about this, guys. Because I do talk to them, and sometimes I will say that the staff like the corporate types do whatever they do to try to make ends meet, right? Yeah. But the day-to-day staff are usually open to constructive criticism because they're just trying to do their jobs, and I can talk to them. Have you noticed a change in that in the past year? You stop getting, yeah. And so you've noticed?
One it said that this month I'm 16% less than last month. But I'm only one person
Yeah.
and
Yeah, so
the mailing about your
Yeah.
neighbors are better than you are.
Yeah, and so it's gotten a little, mine is wrong because their billing system thinks my house is well, their billing system knows that my house is a house, but that chart thinks my house is an apartment. So it's like, oh man, you're using a lot more than your neighbor. But we're actually like, we live like hermits. We're actually really efficient, but we don't have an apartment, right? Anymore. And so, yeah. And so yeah, I mean, I do paperless, but I understand if you want like a physical piece of paper to go over, that's your preference. That's completely fine. But the idea in theory, I guess, is to try to nudge people to be more efficient. I don't know how effective it is in practice, but the past year, ComEd's billing system, they rolled out a new like overhaul of their billing system and they completely goofed it up. And a year later, certain things are still wrong, like, thinking I'm in an apartment. We actually, in that rate case that just wrapped up, we tentatively successfully, they could still claw it back later, I'm working on it, got an almost $30 million disallowance for the cost overruns to try to fix their broken system that they broke. They wanted to charge everybody extra because they're like, oh, well, our cost to serve you went up because, and who did that? Right? I felt like a kindergarten teacher, like, now tell them who broke it. Was it you? They're like, well, this is hindsight review. I'm like, no, it's actually not working right now. But yeah, and I would say that, they know they messed that up, right? But they had to make certain arguments in court because they're always trying to get paid. It's their job, but privately, I'm sure they know. But yeah, it's been a year and the system's still a little broken. A lot broke, that's fair.
Thank you for your mention of community solar. I've had a number of mailings of solicitations to join that, and I always read over them very carefully to see where the catch was. But the fact that you are using it makes me think maybe I should look a little closer.
Yeah. And what
can we call Cub?
Yes.
Because I think I got on somebody's list to.
Okay. There's a long waiting list. Yeah.
When they build the solar panels to try to do that. And I'm still not exactly sure if I'm going to save money or not, but I think it's generally a good idea to go solar.
Yeah. So if it's so the community solar program itself, like the state sponsored by law, what they're legally allowed to actually call those words community solar, there's no risk to you. And so effectively what it is like the difference, right? It's like, oh, well, how am I saving money? Like who's losing money here, right? And the answer is the solar developer gets solar renewable energy credits that count toward the state's renewable portfolio standard and their goals. And so they can then sell those RECs to the utilities to cover their requirements for renewables across the system. And that's how they make up that cost difference. But as far as you're concerned, you just save money. And the renewable portfolio standard, I mean, that's a law anyway. Your action is not making other people pay more money. It's really just putting you in the position where you benefit personally.
We've got two more from the auditorium and then we want to take a couple from Zoom.
Yeah.
We get our electricity from an alternative supplier, and since they did their revision of the billing system, who do I contact to get the detailed bill of the type that you described? To get it electronically, but still, paperless. But who do I call? ComEd or the other supplier?
So, who do you usually get your bill from?
Right now.
Oh, so what you're saying is, you're trying to figure out who this company is.
I'll find it.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can, yeah, worst case, you can call us, yeah. That's what I was gonna say, worst case, you can call us, yeah, if you're really up a creek, you know. But we only deal with people having great days, let me tell you. But so the, yeah, so billing is usually mostly handled through your utility. Even if you have an alternative supplier, you may or may not receive a separate bill from them. Most people don't, which is why a lot of them don't realize they're on alternatives. So you probably want to talk to ComEd. Because this is electric we're talking, right?
This is electric.
You should call ComEd.
I handle the maintenance for a large religious building in Skokie, and we were contacted by a private contractor that said they would come in, replace all of our fluorescent light bulbs, remove the ballast, and replace them with LED tubes.
Sure.
And there were over 200 fluorescent tubes and about 25 exit signs. They replaced them all within a couple days, and we paid $600, and according to the estimate, ComEd paid $6,000 to them to do the work.
Through the energy efficiency
And
program.
it would save us thousands of dollars a year and pay for itself in 5 months. So anyone that has a business that has a lot of older type bulbs, it's a good deal.
And they will do energy efficiency assessments for businesses and homes free of charge. The home assessment, I'll say though, is mostly just replacing any incandescent bulbs with LEDs and maybe putting some like pipe insulation on by the furnace or something. A more thorough audit usually will cost you money, and that's where they're checking like what's leaking and all of that. But yeah, especially for businesses, the energy efficiency program you're talking about can be a huge boon to a lot of, well, in your case, not business, but institutional buildings, sort of, like here.
You mentioned the $2 reduction for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Is that 100% electrical, or does it also apply to hybrids?
Do you plug it in to charge it? Then it applies.
Oh, okay.
So it's, yeah, if you have a plug-in charge car, and you take service on a time variant rate, which right now, that's just real-time pricing. Next year, you'll have the time of use option that you asked about. So yeah, it's if you take service on that rate and have an EV, they'll give you $2 a month. And if you charge it overnight, your rates will be cheaper if you're on that time variant rate. Yeah.
Eric, we've had 25 people on Zoom, and they comments have been great. You get very good press. I think we should give Eric a big hand.
Cool.
Questions? Okay, now that we've given you a big hand, some scare questions.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, one question I have, and it's related to the second question, so I'll put them both together.
Makes sense.
The last question would be, tell us how you're funded and how safe you feel in our current environment.
Sure.
And the main question is, we're having a feeding frenzy in America right now with regulatory agencies. So I see yourself as kind of that. How do you feel? What concerns you about the environment we're in without getting into the left-right politics?
Sure. Yeah. No, totally understand. And like we're a nonpartisan organization.
And you guys feel safe because we want, you and your family to be okay here.
My 2-year-old appreciates that very much. She's not napping yet, so maybe she heard you. But yeah, so the way we're funded is through private donations. Now, I will say that we are sometimes a partner with other organizations in large federal grants, which of course were affected by that OMB memo and the freeze and sort of is that what they're doing? Is that not what there was, right? There was a little bit of uncertainty around that for a while. And my understanding from our executive director is that we're fine on that front. Government grants are not most of what we do. It's mostly from large charitable foundations and from individuals donating. And so, as you imagine, our direct mail funding has gone down over time, like with every nonprofit. Small donations have gone down over time. We're increasingly dependent on large charitable foundations, which, of course, anyone who runs a nonprofit knows, like, especially if you're the director, how much time you have to spend raising money, right? And so I would say that our revenues are not significantly directly affected by what you're talking about. However, we always need money.
Okay, but let me pose the last question.
Yeah.
In a little different way.
Yeah.
The pressure that is being placed more on helping the companies and not being as supportive as for the consumers. Now, that's me saying this based on, I think, is just a general feeling of what's going on. Do you feel that it's going to almost heighten what you're going to need to do? Because will the companies be feeling more emboldened?
So for the state regulated portion I was talking about, that doesn't directly impact it. However, all the transmission and the sort of like supply wholesale markets and all that, that's all federally regulated. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission having turnover always affects that, right? And downstream, it affects your bills. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, historically has been very technocratic in a way. It's usually not felt highly partisan. I'll give an example of that. Years back, during the first Trump administration, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, people might be familiar with, put out a directive to, short version being basically paying more to keep coal and gas and nuclear plants online. The idea being that they provide base load, right? That they have their fuel on site. It's not like renewables where it depends on the weather and everything, right? That was the rationale. And however, it was procedurally not really how that type of thing is done. There wasn't a lot of administrative review that went into it, not a lot of fact finding, not a lot of science going into it. And so it went to FERC, even though it was majority appointees by the same president, they went, right? And they balked, right? And I was involved in that lawsuit, and that plan was rejected. They ended up doing subtler things that had different impacts, but I would say that traditionally within that space, there isn't a huge back and forth between administrations. Now that may change. We don't know. Every administration has the option to treat this differently. But so far, I would say that a big thing is in transmission, that in order to bring in a lot of sort of low cost wind and solar, especially wind from out of state, and bring it to metropolitan areas, right? They need to build transmission. Transmission is really expensive. And when it's across multiple states, there's an issue of cost allocation between states. It's better for everyone in the long term if that is done in the most coherent, direct pathway possible. But that means getting each state and each utility involved buy-in, and there's a lot of choke points there. There had been an effort to try to smooth that regional planning process. Conventional wisdom right now is that that might be halted. So there's an example that could affect you indirectly in the long term. These are policy choices that change, but this idea of like, are they going to like rein in enforcement of bad actors in this space remains to be seen. Typically, the impression from this administration is that they are going to take a more hands-off approach to that type of thing. Anytime politicians say something, it's like you kind of got to wait and see.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Okay, Eric.
Well, just one question.
Oh,
When do our rate charge us less? At what time of the day or going into evening that would charge us individually less?
So you're saying if you're on real-time pricing, if you were to switch into real-time pricing, It's technically unpredictable, but the general pattern, which is reflected in the set schedule time of use rate that'll be available next year, is that generally after 9 p.m., especially after 10 p.m., it drops, and that it starts to pick up a little after 6 a.m. And then the worst is generally 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. If you're on that rate. If you're not on that rate, you won't be compensated for doing that, but you'd be doing everyone else a solid, so that's nice.
I think I'm going to do it right now. Okay, Eric, on behalf of the North Shore Senior Center and everybody here, I want to thank you one more time for a great presentation.